Hello. Students in my creative coding class are working with Python to produce poetry, and I've asked them to write programs that will take a text file as input and then produce a poem from that. Reading a text file into Python is a frequent and pretty common task, so I'm making this video to show you two methods to accomplish that if you're writing Python in a Google Colab notebook. So let's get started. I have a notebook here, and I'll share this in the YouTube description and in Canvas. And I'm just going to work through it. I'm going to give you two different methods, and these are two slightly different scenarios that you might find yourself wanting to work through. Excuse me, but you may find others as well. Oh, cool! I just noticed I have a black t-shirt on, and then like there's a black background, so it's almost like I have just a floating head here. Sorry, I didn't look at this earlier. That's pretty cool. Okay, so anyway. I am really a human, not just a floating head. Let's take a look at a couple of methods here for doing this. So the first scenario that I'm talking about is if you have a plain text file that you know is already on the web and you want to import that into your code so you can use it. We're going to transform it from the contents of a URL into a text file. So you can do it with only just a handful of lines of code, and that's why I like this method. The other thing I like about this is that if you give your code to someone else, you don't also have to give them like a copy of the file you want them to process. So let's talk about a couple of things. First of all, I've got a link here to plain text file. Whenever we're doing this, we're talking about plain text. And I mean plain text, ASCII text, or UTF-8, I guess. But we're talking about plain text, not formatted text. If you write text in a Word document or in a Google document or even HTML, you are creating rich text that has formatting and other information in it. And that's not gonna work in this scenario that we're talking about here. So we really need plain text. And that's gonna play out especially if you are getting the text of a novel. So this is an example of plain text. This is a text file. I just pulled this up on Gutenberg.org. And Gutenberg.org is a good place for finding plain text files for this kind of project. Excuse me. So Gutenberg.org has lots and lots of books on it, books that are in the public domain, and so you're free to use them for stuff like this. You can find many literary classics here for free, and I sometimes like to use those, but for this I'm going to just go for this latest thing here where it says some of the latest ebooks, and this one it says is The Art of Natural Sleep. That sounds kind of interesting. So when you look at a book listing like this, you've got several different versions you can download. You want to make sure you get the right one, and I'll show you how to find that. It's this one right here, the plain text UTF-8. If you just want to actually read the book, this one's usually easier to read, which is the HTML version, but this is not plain text, so this is not actually what we need. Let's see, I did want to kind of learn about this. Okay, 1908, interesting. Great, no idea, never heard of this book, so this is a good one to work with then. But the one we really want is this part down here, plain text UTF-8. So if we click on this, and I don't know if OBS is showing the URL, it is good. Okay, so if you look at the URL for it, you can see that it's gutenberg.org/files/some numbers, and then it ends in .txt. File extensions are important. They do tell you and the computer what kind of file it is, and if it's a true plain text file, it will probably end in .txt. So that's a good sign. And this is the URL for it. URL means Uniform Resource Locator. This is where we can find this on the web. If I wanted you to read this, I could send you this URL as a link. You could click on it and you could view this file. But it's public on the web on Gutenberg.org. So I'm going to copy this URL to my clipboard, and over here in this file, the notebook, I'm going to start working on it. So I'm going to add a comment here for myself with the URL, and this is going to help me remember this just in case I need it again. I will load. And so to actually import it here, I'm going to use a library called requests. And so I need to, first of all, import that library called requests. And that's just the statement import and then requests. And I'm going to go ahead and run this cell of code, even though nothing's really happening other than that, just to make sure that the import worked. And it did in this case. If request was not part of my environment, I would have to install it, but it is already here, and that's great because that's what I need. Request is very powerful and convenient and great, so I highly recommend it. Now, that said, I do often have to Google just basic stuff with it because I don't have it memorized. So earlier I Googled this, and this gives me the basics of what I need. This is W3 School's explanation of how to work with the requests module, and it shows me an example here And that's enough to remind me what I need to do. So I'm going to go back here and just type it out and explain it as I do. So I like to use the word result to contain the thing that requests comes back with. And with requests, it's a bunch of functions all bundled together, and you access the functions by invoking the requests module and then adding a period and then the name of the function that you want to use. In this case, excuse me, I'm using the get method because I'm getting something from that web server from Gutenberg.org. You can also use the post method to get things, which is not important to get into right now. But this is the URL that this is the place where I put the URL that I want. So this is the URL I have identified as interesting. I'll copy that and then just paste it there. Notice I had to put this between quote marks, and I'm kind of copying the W3 Schools method, so to remember the syntax for it. So that should be correct. Let me go ahead and run this code and make sure I don't get any errors. I'm going to add a bit here because I am going to share this notebook, and maybe it would be easier just to work through the notebook instead of watching this video. Okay, so this code worked without errors, so I think it's going to be fine to proceed. I have now, I've asked requests to go get a result, but all it's done so far is it saved that result. The result isn't just the contents of that. The result is actually a lot of other things like the response code, any headers or metadata. I actually just want the literal contents of that file, which is simple in this case because it's just a text file. So I'm going to assign that to a variable called text, and it is just results.text. Text in this case is an object of the results object, or part of the results object that comes back from the get method of requests. So that hopefully works. Let's find out. Oh, it's not results, it's result. So you want to make sure you spell things the same way. And okay, so we're good. Now to find out if I have the contents of this document in my text variable, so you notice what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to put the contents of that into this named variable called text. Then I should probably print it just to see. And since this is just checking, I'm going to make this a separate code cell, not two separate code cells, one separate code cell just to print the contents of this and see what happens. And there it is. All right, so that's the full text of this, and it's kind of long, Whenever you get really long output like this, by the way, in Colab, you can click this little X and it'll delete the output. So that was just me confirming that I do have the full contents of that. Now, because it's a string, I can do different kinds of string operations with it. In order to transform this into poetry, it's probably going to be useful to parse this into a list, for example. So I could do something like this to give me all of the words in that as a list, and then I can find out how many words there are if I ask it, like, what is the length of the word list? And it's 13,208 words, so pretty long, and that's why when you saw it print there, it kind of took over the screen. But I'm not going to get into that in this video. I just wanted to show you how to get it into a text, to get all that text into a string, and that was one method. In method 2, the assumption is that you've got a text file on your computer and you want to upload it into your Colab environment and then read it into your Python so you can work with it as a string. So I'm going to get a different book and then work with it that way. This is one I found just called The Birds of Australia, Volume 5. I found it in Project Gutenberg as one of the most recent books. So I'm going to save it, just do Control-S in my browser, or right-click Save As, and I'm going to name this birdsofaustralia.text. You can't see this window that's popping up right now, but I'll show it. You'll see the text file in a moment when I upload it back into Colab. So here I am in my Colab tab, and I'm working on method 2, so I'm going to go ahead and hide method 1 for the moment by clicking on it like that. And over here on the left, you've got several different functions that are useful, and one I'm going to use here is the one that looks like a folder. This is going to let me upload files and create folders and other things. I'm just going to do one file here, of course, but you can do lots if you need to. And I'm going to do that by clicking on the upload button here, find birdsofaustralia.text and upload it here. And as you can see, I named this file Birds of Australia. That's how I said it out loud, but as I've written it, it's birds_of_australia.text and all lowercase letters. That's important. I always recommend using lowercase letters, and I definitely recommend avoiding spaces. Spaces can be encoded different ways when you copy and paste them. Sometimes it'll be literally space, sometimes it'll be backslash space, sometimes it'll be %20, and it's just easier not to worry about that by just not using spaces. So that's fine. That's all we need to know. Okay, so we're going to use a different method down here. So I'm going to make a code cell, and now that I've got this file in here, Well, I'll leave that open for a moment, but I'll show you a different way this is a different way to get the contents of this particular text file into a variable here in my Colab notebook. So I'm going to use this method here that it's kind of hard to explain as I do it, but it's it works. So it's the open method, then it's going to create a file handle that connects the code to the file. And to do that, I need to know where the file is. Now I know where the file is, it's on my computer and I'm looking at it right here, but I need to know where Colab thinks it is. And the way that a computer thinks of the location of a file is called its path. So what I should do here is right click on it in Colab, and there's an option that says copy path. Hopefully OBS is picking that up. Sometimes it doesn't pick up pop-ups, but I think it is. Hopefully it's showing you this one. I'm going to select copy path and then paste that path here. And it's just /content/birdsofaustralia.txt. So that's the file I want to open. Now the file, I'm creating what's called a file handle here. You don't really need to worry about this part, by the way, but this is what's happening. I'm making a file handle, so I like to call it F. And then a colon, and then the next line is indented to show that this is part of the with statement here, and it's while this file handle is active. Again, it doesn't totally matter. You can just copy this and make it work for you. And I'm going to save this into a variable called bird text. And I'm going to use the read function of that file handle to get the contents of that file and then store them inside of this variable called bird text. So I'm going to close this side view here so you can see this more clearly. So bird text equals f.read should put the contents of that file into that variable called bird text. And I'm going to run this cell to see if I get any errors. No errors. Great. So let's see. I'm going to do the same thing I did before, where I'm going to transform that string bird text into a list using split, and we'll see how many words there are on that list. This is also giving me the length of this document, of this book, right? So 69,302 words in this list of words that I got from that string. So I would probably like to do lots more interesting things with this to make this into a poem, but I think this is pretty good for now. These are two methods. I like both of these methods. They're both pretty easy, short. I say short or easy. I mean, they're both just a couple of lines of code, and you're welcome to copy and paste my lines. A couple of things you have to remember about them, and so that's why sometimes copying and pasting is easier. Just copy and paste it, but then switch out the values like the URL or the file name for whatever your URL is or whatever your file name is, and you should be good to go. So I'll share this, and I'm going to make, like I said, I'm going to make some other videos for showing you how to do some things with those text files to turn them into poetry. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching.